August 26, 1346. The low hills near the tiny village of Crécy-en-Ponthieu in northern France. On the slope stands a thin line of roughly 7,000 to 14,000 exhausted English and Welsh soldiers. Below, in the dust and dusk, sprawls a grotesquely swollen French camp. From 22, by some estimates, 35,000 men, including the very flower of European chivalry. On paper, this is supposed to be a beating, a public execution of some pirate upstarts. By evening, it's the opposite. More than 1,500 noble French horsemen lie face down in the mud, many without ever swinging a sword, and the English may have lost only a couple of hundred men. On this day, the belief that steel armor and a noble title make you a god on horseback dies, and a new idea is born, that mud, discipline, and a cheap arrow can execute an entire era. Imagine you're a Welsh longbowman. Your hands are hardened to knots of callus. The bowstring burns your cheek. Your eyes squint against the rain. In front of you is a row of slanted stakes. Behind you, silent English men-at-arms, dismounted knights you're sworn to cover. From below comes a strange roar, like a distant surf. Thousands of hooves, armor plates, and voices of the French host. In the distance, a scarlet banner flares, the oriflamme, the sign that no quarter will be given today. A couple of hours from now, you'll be standing ankle-deep in horseflesh and iron, and someone will tell you the English army lost 40 men. Even if that's propaganda, the order of magnitude is clear. On this day, the god of the arrow laughs at steel. But how did it happen that peasant archers and a few primitive guns essentially switched off the finest cavalry in Christendom? Why does the French king Philip VI throw his elite into frontal charges against a well-prepared position, at dusk, over a rain-soaked slope already clogged with his own dead? And more importantly, why after the first waves of slaughter does no one at the top say, "Stop, this is suicide"? By the end of this story, we'll see exactly how a mix of pride, logistics, and basic physics smashes a 500-year-old belief in the invincibility of the knight. To grasp the scale of what breaks here, we need to rewind a bit. This is the first phase of the 100 Years' War, a long dispute over the French crown and the lands of Aquitaine. The English king Edward III is formally a vassal of the French king, but under English law his claim to the French throne looks more legitimate than that of the Valois. Politics, dynastic rights, money from wool and wine, everything melts together into one protracted conflict, where every campaign is also a PR operation. Crécy will not just be a big victory, it will be a demonstration that the old model of knights decide everything no longer works. In the summer of 1346, Edward III lands in Normandy with an army of about 7,000 to 15,000 men by modern estimates, mostly English and Welsh, with a sprinkling of Norman dissidents and mercenaries. Instead of hunting for a decisive set-piece battle, the English launch a classic chevauchée, a devastating raid. They burn villages, sack the wealthy city of Caen, tear up communications. The French monarchy doesn't just suffer a military embarrassment, its tax base is going up in flames. For Philip VI, this is no longer an abstract quarrel over coats of arms. It's a direct hit to the wallet of the entire kingdom. Philip reacts by the textbook of the 14th century. He calls up all France, vassals, mercenaries, the King of Bohemia, the Counts of Flanders and Hainaut, Genoese crossbowmen from Italy. Medieval chroniclers throw around huge numbers like 70 to 100,000. Modern historians are more modest. The French probably had at least twice, maybe 3 times as many troops as the English. But people of that time care less about precise arithmetic than about the feeling. They are a sea, we are a stream. Philip's aim is to catch the English between the Seine and the Somme, cut them off from the sea, pin them against a river, and wipe them out in one crushing blow. Edward pulls north toward Picardy, burning everything in his path, and suddenly finds himself in a trap. In front, the Somme with its guarded fords. Behind, the massive French army closing in. The English escape almost by miracle, and thanks to a local traitor guide, forcing a little-known ford at Blanche-Tac and slipping away to the north bank. Now the roles reverse. Philip is the one forced to pursue at all costs, while Edward can choose the battlefield. He stops near Crécy, and it is here that he turns the landscape itself into a weapon. The main cheat code of the English is the longbow. The Welsh-English longbow, up to 2 meters tall and requiring years of practice, lets a skilled archer fire 6 to 10 arrows a minute at serious range. The Genoese crossbow shoots powerfully but slowly, and needs heavy pavis shields and assistance to reload. All else equal, the longbow is a machine gun facing a bolt-action rifle. But the bow by itself is just a tool. The real overpowered factor is how the English build it into their system. Edward III breaks the stereotype that a knight must fight on horseback. At Crécy, most of his heavy cavalry dismounts and forms a solid wall of shields and spears in the center. On the flanks are massed groups of archers, and in front, stakes hammered into the ground pointing toward the enemy, and pits, wolf's traps. The English army turns into something like a hedgehog, a heavy, bristling center with toothed ears of archers on the sides. This setup is designed to grind exactly what France is proudest of: heavy cavalry on overheated horses. The French elite, on the other hand, is psychologically not ready for this kind of war. For them, real glory is a frontal knightly charge, close combat, the chance to capture a rich enemy and collect a fat ransom. That explains their tragic blindness. Warnings that the men are exhausted, that the enemy sits on a commanding height, that the day is slipping into evening all bounce off like arrows from good plate. In the heads of many nobles there's a simple script. We'll sweep these island upstarts aside with sheer mass and force them to make peace on our terms. Edward chooses a rolling stretch of ground with a gentle slope, partly bounded by woods and villages, so the front narrows. The English form up in 3 battles, 3 lines, each under its own commander. The right flank and part of the center are under his 16-year-old son, the future Black Prince. In front, according to some sources, the English set up a few primitive guns, one of the earliest recorded uses of artillery in European battle. Their real military impact is debatable, but the thunder and smoke surely do something to the nerves of horses and men. The English dig shallow pits, plant stakes, and strengthen their position. The night before the battle for them means food, rest, and maintenance. Every archer makes sure he has a full stock of arrows. Men dry their clothes, tighten armor straps, check bowstrings. Edward sends the cavalry to the rear, so the old habit of riding out to glory doesn't drag them into a foolish charge. He knows exactly what he is today. Not a hunter, but a man in ambush, waiting for the prey to shove itself into his jaws. The French reach Crécy much later, tired from a fast march and stretched out along the roads. Approaches to the battlefield turn into a traffic jam of columns where men and horses get in each other's way trying to redeploy. Despite advice to wait until morning and let the army make camp, Philip orders an immediate attack. Psychologically, he cannot afford to look like a coward by stopping his advance in front of bandits. Genoese crossbowmen are pushed out in front, effectively as a disposable shield. As the first French line forms up, a brief rain shower sweeps across the field. English archers, by habit, unstring their bows and tuck the strings under hats and jackets. Crossbowmen, according to some accounts, keep their strings under protection, according to others, don't manage to. Historians argue about how much the rain actually weakened the crossbows, but inside the heads of the participants everything is simple. Mud underfoot, a grey veil of water, heavy air, and the blinding pale sky behind the English positions. The perfect cocktail for chaos. The first phase of the slaughter begins with a duel of missile troops. The Genoese move forward, but their big pavis shields and extra bolts are still back with the baggage train. Someone up the chain was in too much of a hurry. They fire their first volley and receive a wall of arrows in reply. The longbow reaches farther and fires faster than their crossbows. The ground in front of the hill is suddenly strewn with falling men and horses. Without shields, knee-deep in sticky mud, the Genoese begin to fall back. At that moment, the proudest French knights behind them don't see seasoned mercenaries caught under fire. They see cowards blocking our glory and spur their horses straight over them, literally trampling their own troops. Phase 2 is knightly hell on a hillside. You're a French man-at-arms, heavy armor crushing your shoulders, shield on your arm, horse keyed up under you. You push uphill as arrows hiss all around, some clanging harmlessly off plate, many slipping through gaps, into eyes, groins, armpits. Horses stumble into pits and onto stakes, crash down, break legs. The next ranks pile into them. Men in iron topple over each other, turning into a living press of armor and flesh. Many will die, not from sword blows, but from suffocation, broken necks, and the simple impossibility of getting back up under the weight of others. Above, the English line almost doesn't move. Archers stitch the flanks and the gaps. The men-at-arms take on the few who make it through. According to the chroniclers, Edward is told that the Black Prince's sector is under heavy pressure and asked whether to send reinforcements. In Froissart's version, he answers, "Let my son earn his spurs if he wishes to wear my armor," and stays where he is. Modern historians doubt the exact wording, but the point stands. The English hold their formation and resist the temptation to fling the reserve into a countercharge while the enemy is still smashing himself against the walls. At some point, the French assault stops being a coordinated strike and turns into a series of individual, desperate gestures. The most famous is the last charge of the blind king of Bohemia, John of Luxembourg. According to the chroniclers, John asks other knights to tie their horses' reins to his so he can ride with them into the thick of the fight. This small death squad does indeed go forward and is almost completely wiped out. The king's body is later found on the field, surrounded by dead men and horses. Some modern authors see this as a deliberate suicide of a knight who refuses to grow old and blind at home. For that culture, it's an ideal, and militarily utterly pointless, gesture. Now the dry but important accounting of death. By the tally of English heralds, they find the bodies of 1,542 noble French men-at-arms on the field. 1 king, 9 princes, 10 counts, a duke, an archbishop, a bishop, and a mass of mere knights and squires. Jean Lebel talks of 15,000 to 16,000 French dead overall. Other chroniclers inflate the figure to 30,000. Modern historians are more cautious and put total French losses around 10,000 to 15,000 if you count the lower orders. English casualties are the most controversial number. Propaganda shouts about 40 men. Serious estimates say 100 to 300 killed. But even if you throw out all the wild claims, the contrast stays absurd. The battlefield after Crécy is a nightmare for anyone in charge of burials. Thousands of bodies in armor, hundreds of horses, broken shields and lances, arrows sticking out of the ground like stiff grass. For several days, the English are busy stripping hauberks, surcoats, and helmets. This is a war where a dead knight is still money. Local peasants and monks will go on finding bones and metal in ditches and pits for a long time. Parts of important corpses are carried home for ceremonial funerals. The rest are most likely dumped into mass graves. The stench, according to contemporaries, is so bad that people avoid the area for weeks. From a military point of view, Crécy is a textbook of how not to fight, and how to. The French show that raising the whole country into one huge, badly controlled host does not guarantee victory if you can't aim that hammer. Force-marching exhausted troops, attacking in disorder, ignoring advice to wait until morning. All of it cascades into a domino effect. The English demonstrate the opposite. A moderately sized but disciplined force, using terrain, fieldworks, and combined arms intelligently, can tear apart a much stronger opponent. Politically, Crécy doesn't end the war, but it does flip the balance. Edward III doesn't march on Paris after the battle. Instead, he lays siege to the port of Calais. The siege lasts nearly a year and ends with the town's fall in 1347. Calais becomes England's window into northern France for the next 2 centuries, a permanent logistical bridge for new invasions. For the French crown, this is not just a defeat in the field, but a long-term economic and strategic blunder. An English base in the heart of the Channel is a splinter they can't pull out. Tactically, Crécy, together with the later Agincourt, will enter the manuals as a prime example of infantry-based defense and missile troops triumphing over heavy cavalry. Of course, knights won't vanish tomorrow or the day after, but their aura as an unstoppable force of nature cracks. More and more commanders start thinking about how to shield their cavalry from arrows, how to use their own archers and infantry, how to pick the ground. The English longbow earns an almost mystical reputation, even though in reality it's just a mass skill, organized and drilled properly. Mythmakers, naturally, have a field day. Stories of the Black Prince standing under a rain of arrows, of the blind king riding to his last charge, of French knights who chose to die rather than flee. All of this turns into legends retold for centuries by chroniclers, painters, and national historians. Some present Crécy as proof of English cunning, hiding behind peasants with bows. Others see it as divine punishment for the arrogance of the French nobility. Modern researchers, poking through financial records, letters, and soil, scrape the patina of legend away and find much more banal things underneath. Poor coordination, overloaded roads, tired horses and men, an elite unwilling to learn from people it despised. Draw a thick line under it all, and the main message of Crécy is simple and unpleasant for anyone who loves beautiful armor. War is less and less about the personal bravery of one aristocrat, and more about the system, logistics, discipline, technology, the ability to make mud and rain work for you. At Crécy, the illusion dies that you can ignore reality if you are rich, noble, and well-equipped enough. A new, much more cynical truth is born. Sometimes the fate of kings is decided by men with no coats of arms who simply have been practicing drawing a bow for a very long time. In the end, the Battle of Crécy is not about the English are better than the French. It's a story about how, slowly and through piles of bodies, one fundamental idea forces its way through. Physics beats romance. No matter how beautiful the horse, it loses to stakes, pits, and arrows flying on a ballistic curve. A code of honor where retreat is shame turns noble men into fertilizer for someone else's tactics. Somewhere between the first volley of longbows and the last breath of a blind king, the Middle Ages, where the main thing is who you are by birth, starts to die. In its place, very slowly, comes a world where what matters is not the blazon on your shield, but whether you can count to 3 and think before you drive a horse uphill into a rain of arrows.